Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to this panel discussion on the first day of December. Today, we're going to talk about securing your company where cyber and physical security meet. If you haven't been to our panels before, my name is Jake Milstein. I'm the event host. I run marketing for Critical Insight. This is not a sales webinar. But I will tell you what Critical Insight does. Critical Insight is a cybersecurity company based in Seattle, and we have security operations centers, and we watch people's networks for them. We also do risk assessments and all sorts of stuff. And joining us today, actually, we're going to talk about Brian Hurd, who is at Aeon Insurance, and he does all sorts of stuff, including incident response. And we work together with him on cases, and he is super duper smart. But we're going to do intros in a second. This is me just burning time as people come into the room, and I see the numbers tick up. If you look over on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a chat feature. The chat feature is where you say hi, is where you ask questions. The best part of this discussion is when you interrupt and ask questions that are on your mind. You put a question in there, I will interrupt everybody, and I will say, hey, there's a question coming in from Danny, and Danny has a question. That's the best part of these. So don't forget to say hi in the chat. Go ahead and tell us where you're joining from. We'd love to know. We've had people join from Japan and South Korea and Alaska and Minnesota and all sorts of other places. So anyway, thank you all for joining, and we appreciate you being here. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do introductions next. We're going to say, hey, these are the really interesting chaps who we have. We're going to then, Mike Hamilton is going to go through the facts. And then we're going to have some Q&A, and the Q&A is really the best part. One reminder, stay until the very end because we have some prizes at the very end, and we want your opinion. We do have a survey in the end, which we prepared ahead of time, but I'm kind of thinking we might need to change the survey because these three guys are going to tell some really impressive stories, and I might want you to vote on which story is the best.
I know I'm losing that one.
Oh yeah, the hot dog story, the Seattle story. Well, we're gonna see which. I might change that survey, or in the chat, you all can just say, "Ooh, that one was the best." All right, Mike Germain, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on where you're at. Mike Germain, I'm currently the Director of Physical Standards here at Blue Origin. Been here a little over 2 years. Prior to that, I was with over 30 years with the United States Secret Service. My last posting here for about 10 years was here in the Northwest. I oversaw operations to include cyber investigations over the Pacific Northwest from Alaska, Oregon, Washington State, Montana, and northern Idaho.
All right, Brian Hurd.
Hello, my name is Brian Hurd. I've been in the community since about 1993. Founded the Cyber Counterespionage Program at NCIS. Yeah, the same one in the TV show. And then was in charge of cyber espionage, cyber counterterrorism, including running the identities for the U.S. watch listing system. Then went over to Microsoft, was their first chief of cybercrime intelligence for a while, and now work for the global company of Aeon doing cyber breach response, cyber insurance, other things. And have worked with both Mikes, honored to, over the many decades we've all been in the community, in government and out. So I'm really looking forward to a fun discussion and interaction with the audience.
Brian's breaking the rule of the Critical Insight rule is we only have people named Mikes in our webinars, but All right, Mike Hamilton.
Okay, so Mike Hamilton is the least interesting person on this panel, and I had to beg for more bullet points in my bio because I was getting upstaged pretty badly. So I spent the last, so I'm the founder of Critical Insight. I spent the last 10 years in government. I was policy advisor for Governor Inslee in Washington State, vice chair of the State, Local, Tribal, and Territorial Government Coordinating Council for DHS. I was the CISO for the city of Seattle for about 8 years, and before that, all in the private sector. I was the managing consultant for VeriSign Global Security Consulting after about a previous 15 years doing security consulting and contracting and hand-rolling firewalls and doing things like that. So here we are.
All right. And again, my name is Jake Milstein. If you have questions as we go, put them in the chat over on the right. You can also email me, jake@criticalinsight.com. If you don't want to use the chat, because some people don't. Hey, I don't know. All right. Mr. Hamilton, go for it.
Okay, so the intersection. So this has been a topic that's coming up increasingly, and it's been kind of flopping around for about 10 years, but I think it's getting much more serious. So where do these things intersect? Well, so I think of it as, around loss prevention. Brian and Michael are more espionage and terrorism, and like I say, they are going to have some stories that are much more interesting than my own. But yeah, removable media. You can walk in with malware and you can walk out with secrets, and it's hard to detect. Cameras and surveillance devices, especially those that are not configured correctly, become a danger. And that you can use them for unauthorized surveillance. Access records from going in doors and combined with login data, logs from your activity on computers. If they don't match up, we can see login from China right after you walked into a door in Redmond. Something's wrong there. HVAC and the smartening of cities in particular constitutes a danger. And, to me, in my swim lane, this is something that we're worried about a lot. And I've seen, in fact, I'll hopefully tell a story about seeing HVAC freak out and cause real problems. Operational technologies, we're talking about things that move train tracks, especially ports, move train tracks, raise bridges, intermodal transportation, right? That's all got a big physical component. And there's cyber managing everything. Today, people can walk in with surveillance devices all over their bodies. Google Glass, your Apple Watch. Probably be hard to walk in with an Oculus on your face and not let anybody know that, but that's coming. There are vulnerabilities in physical access tokens that can be compromised, and we are, as quickly as possible, and especially you consumers, I'm going to give you a finger wag on this. Everybody's buying this stuff that phones home, and without changing the configuration, what you find is it has all kinds of things enabled that you don't want, that allows it to be compromised and or abused. So all of these things have a physical and a cyber component here, right? How do we get our arms around this stuff? Go ahead and go to the next slide, Jake. So when we talk about threats and vulnerabilities to all this stuff, so theft of your stuff, that's a threat. Compromise of your facility, that's a threat. Surveillance, material compromise, especially everybody's talking about a lot of supply chain things now, and material compromise on the way in the door. I'm sure my compatriots here have some great stories about that. Introduction of malware, all these are threats. What makes you vulnerable to those threats? Crappy visitor controls is a big one. Employees that can be bribed. Again, supply chain, don't know what's happening 3 companies back there. Products that are compromised, and I have seen this happen. In fact, we have seen this happen as a community. SolarWinds was a compromised product. Weak hiring, you're not doing appropriate background checking, right? So somebody can have somebody hired into your organization that is a spy. Bad technology configuration, and I think this one's a big one too. Shadow IT. It's the people that bring in junk and stick it, on the network. If you are not detecting that kind of thing very well, that's a big danger. So all these things are all in our face right now. Everybody thinks ransomware. Well, there's a whole lot of things going on here that we need to pay attention to that can end up as ransomware, starting with, for example, an employee being bribed to bring in, malware into an organization. It happens. In fact, it's reported recently that they just arrested a guy who was making offers to people to introduce malware, introduce ransomware into corporations. So heads up. Next slide. So here's a whole bunch of stuff that has happened recently. And, again, Brian talks about the fact that he is a responder for things like this, and even events probably that Brian is not able to talk about. We work together on several things. Mostly we are in the prevention, detection, business, and Brian is really in the response business, but there are lots of places where we intersect and work together. So, this $1 million was offered for a USB insertion into a product we can't name. Yes, that recently happened. A criminal was, like I said, arrested for attempting to turn an employee into their malware distribution arm. The Panama Papers, there's activism going on and stuff like that is getting stolen. We know that super microchips were modified back in the supply chain. There was a big Bloomberg article about this, and not sure where this landed, if they figured out this really happened. Facebook had an employee walk out with a whole bunch of damning evidence that we all know about now. Ed Snowden rolled over on the NSA and took off with a whole bunch of materials and made those public. And yes, the worm that ate the Pentagon. We know, as a company that does penetration testing as well as kicking bad guys out of networks, that if we're having any problem getting into your network at all, we're just going to throw infected USB sticks in the parking lot and wait, because it'll work. So all this stuff kind of sets the stage for now some QA about the intersection of cyber and physical security. So let's QA.
And we have some good questions coming in the chat, but I want to get right first to Brian and Mike G. Both of you spent decades investigating cyber espionage and terrorism, as you talked about in your bios. So, what are some of those intersections between the physical and cybersecurity that caused major issues, and what do organizations need to keep in mind?
Well, Mike had discussed this earlier on some of these pieces. The Secret Service, from my time with there, it goes back to the late 80s and early 90s when we started with the looking at the 2600 baud group in New York City and others and doing those things and when cybercrime was really in its infancy at the time. But then we brought it over into the physical protection world with the protectees as companies began to bring in such as Otis Elevator and servicing their elevators and monitoring that, air handling systems and HVAC systems. So we would begin, here the Secret Service was providing physical security on those items and checking them for all sorts of things. When it occurred to us, the vulnerabilities on just nuisance as well as other pieces in diverting the air handling systems, or Otis Elevator, it's not like the movies. You're not going to drop the elevator 20 stories and watch it crash, but you could hold it up because of just giving you an outage. And you can post all those things, but you need to look at the cyber aspects and how they work outside your perimeter. And that to me is a classic example, or a air handling system. So like when an unnamed group, major company about 10 or so years ago got hit through their credit card system because they were using a third-party remote monitoring of their HVAC systems, and that infiltrated into their systems. The service wasn't surprised that had happened because we were already aware of those sort of vulnerabilities. So there, you can build the wall and make sure people can't get into your property and such, but if you're not understanding where your vulnerabilities are internally, so for those cyber issues, HVAC handling and such, which are still common themes throughout businesses at large, there's that intersectionality right there. Brian?
Thanks. And it is an honor again, Mike, to spend time with you, especially knowing that Kevin Costner in The Bodyguard was modeled after you, not only in looks, but in career. So my name's Brian Hurd. I've been a smartass in the community for going on almost 30 years now.
Confirmed.
And looking at the esteemed audience and what you shared. So some of you are friends already. I won't call that out on a call like this, but I see hospitals, research centers, water supply, governments, banks, and others. So I'm going to rapid through a couple of things, and also some of the people in from our local and national ports and for shipping. I've supported the intersection between cyber and physical for going on almost 30 years now, starting at the NCIS's Anti-Terrorism Alert Center. Some of the things we looked at, as Mike said, back when, and I've worked with Mudge Zatko from Cult of the Dead Cow, for those of you a little older. For those of you younger, that was one of the first hackers ever to testify in front of Congress. He went from black hat to white hat as a hero and friend and mentor. the first issues were operational security, what you could learn to be a physical threat from information or access. Mike Germain and I are talking about setting up for this, the ability to hack into a camera and monitor operations to spy on your companies, your families, your children, or talk to them is a huge issue in physical and intersection with cyber. So securing those devices. There was a question about using them for DDoS we might get to in a little bit, but if we don't, just drop us a note. The other components of this are the ability to stop physical operations from a cyber attack. The things that have impacted Maersk's shipment of containers all over the world because of a Russian cyber weapon in an accounting program of Ukrainian language did an effect all over the company. For those of you who are financial on the call, $300 million write-down in their 10K report. So I work for Aeon, the global insurance company, but I also do what I call, and Mike Hamilton, thanks for the intro, cyber smoke jumpers. We're the people you call in the middle of the night. We like Mike's team, and we often work joint cases, multiple fire departments responding to help similar clients at the same time in various areas. So while there's a great healthy overlap in how we do that, and I used to refer cases to Mike Germain here in Seattle when we were referring information to Secret Service or when they needed contacts to the commercial sector. The final thing I'll say about the story is at one point I was in a classified facility. It was an undisclosed facility. And somebody rolled up in a van at the front door and walked out with this big red jug and started banging on the front door. Now the guards were expecting no delivery. So we thought it was potentially a bomb or something of effect. And when we finally, addressed the person, he says, we're like, what's in the jug? What's in the jug? And they've got guns drawn on him. He's like, it's ketchup. And we're like, what are you doing with a 10-gallon thing of ketchup? He's like, it's for the hot dog machine. And we all look at each other like, what hot dog machine? Apparently somebody in procurement had bought an automated, like a soda machine that makes hot dogs. Didn't know those things existed back then either. And its Wi-Fi had called out on a cellular network to tell him the ketchup needed to be refilled and almost got him killed. So that unintended, your soda machine might be tweeting out its geolocation. Make sure you're okay with that. Right. Whose network is it riding on? Does it have audio and video sensors and other things Mike and I talked about? So this is not just about ransomwares. It's about the devices that are brought in intentionally or unintentionally, new functionality in IoT smart cities. I work a lot of smart cities projects. And I'll turn it back to our host, but in all of these topics, there's one or two people on from water and wastewater. I'm speaking in April up in Canada to the Canadian groups on that. Thank you for keeping our water safe, as we know. So that's a big issue in terrorism Mike and I have been dealing with for decades. Final thing on this for all of you. I know a lot of headlines make it sound like you don't, like this is new to you. It's not. All of us have been doing this for 30 years. I'm glad the headlines are catching up, but it's not like the water and ports people didn't know cybersecurity was an issue 30 years ago.
I'm sure all of you are trying to figure out the same thing I am, which is if you get a 10-gallon thing of ketchup, how much goes on each hot dog? I know everybody is wondering that. Or since Christmas and Hanukkah are coming up or here, depending on which holiday, where can I get one of those? But let's go back to.
I'm jaded.
Hey, one of the questions that somebody had emailed actually ahead of time is about ransomware. And, is the threat today all about ransomware, or, what are some of the other trends we see around physical and insider threats to companies today? Brian, you want to start that one?
I'll give it to Mike. I just did a bit of a round robin diatribe, so I want to give Mike some Mike time as well, or either Mike, please.
All right, Jermaine, you take that one.
All right, Mike and Mike. No, ransomware still remains a serious threat to everybody here. But I'd also say, as Brian and Mike Hamilton had mentioned before, it's the insider threat piece also. It was just in a paper not too ago about a former Chinese national exfiltrating data from a pharmaceutical company on millions of PII information. She was taking a new job. There's some thoughts that she was taking a competitor, but the bigger question raised because of Her ties go back to China. That China is in the process of building one of the largest biometric databases ever, and that the exfiltration of that data. So for us, or I think any company going forward, it's when you let somebody go, or whether through they're just looking for new work or other pieces, making sure personal information. It's amazing talking to peers in other places and such on how HR doesn't even have a procedure to make sure you journals and other data. You just go, hey, I got your badge, thanks for your service, hand over your computer, and you walk. That the exfiltration of that not just PI, but intellectual property, your IP, going out the door after potentially millions of dollars and years of research, and now Mike Germain leaves, and I walk out with everything I took, and the agreements and such that should be in place. Those I think are huge for companies today. If they're not, they should be. That there should be some process in place to vet those people going out the door. It's not necessarily, it's a combination of insider threat and just people being people. You're walking away and go, hey, I worked on this. I should have access to it. You don't. And companies, I think, are seeing more and more of that, and it's a lot more time need to be looked at it. It's clearly, a lot of times it's being when you go back and we've talked to other groups when they've looked at having their stuff exfiltrated, you can see that somebody's downloaded on a hard drive terabytes worth of data, and they were and they give them a 2-week notice. It's usually within that 2-week notice. Hey, I'm moving on, and then they start taking everything with them because they can. And so I think those are important facets to look at, not just beyond the malware. It's internal structure pieces. It's stuff that you're losing millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars potentially, depending on your company. And
agreed. And so in the ransomware arena, there's a couple new trends in ransomware, and then I'm going to kind of round robin over to medical devices. I saw a great question from our friends here in Seattle. Mm-hmm. Hey, Elizabeth, and also a couple of others. So first of all, with ransomware, it's no longer just the encryption attack, which you can potentially get out of with good backups. It is also that they will exfiltrate and then blackmail you not to publish your private materials. Be you a law firm, a bank, a medical research facility, the schematics of the water system, or whatever. So they will they will extort you in 2 different methodologies, now 3. They'll also try and harass your executives if you don't immediately respond to the ransomware at home, on their cell phones, on their personal emails, on their social media. So the adversaries are now really focusing on improving their unfortunate business model for ransomware and extortion. The other thing I'll say is, as Mike said, insider threat, and I'm not being xenophobic or in any way paranoid. I work these cases every day. Billions of dollars are on the line. Like my company, Strauss Freeburg, the Aeon Cyber Unit, worked the case between Uber, Google, and Waymo about developers taking hundreds of thousands of lines of critical AI code for autonomous vehicles from one company to another. For everyone on this call, it's not just about billion-dollar IP, the copy of your Salesforce customers that took your company years to develop, the materials and white papers and other things that people develop, the intellectual property of your organization, or even the source code. And I'll tell you something even scarier. What's worse than having a bad lever is having that person arrive at your organization and poison your source code by inserting 10,000 lines of code stolen from another company. Its removal is horrific. So for CISOs in that regard, where you do app development, do a cold start. No upload of major parts of source code for the first 30 days or 60 days. That stops somebody from bringing their backpack and poisoning your organization. So please, as questions come up, and then one on medical devices. Many of those devices are small and relatively IoT oriented. Therefore, they probably ride on local Wi-Fi and other networks that may not be as secure as one would hope. Although I know for some of the people posing the question, they've done a lot to secure them. For hospitals, that's a big issue on being able to either interfere with those signals or take some of that signal information out, vis-a-vis the people looking for medical information to blackmail or harass, or those attempting to monkey with the systems or interfere with the operations of a hospital or the signals from those critical devices in an ICU in other places. We're seeing a lot of focus on network segmentation and that pen testing, as Mike said, that both our companies work on in different effects.
I'll just top that off by saying that, from the espionage perspective, the Chinese have a plane that looks just like an F-35 sitting on a tarmac, and there's a reason it looks just like an F-35. Now, they didn't know that the F-35 was a lemon, so joke's on them. Thanks, Lockheed. But I do want to answer or try to answer Mike's question here about smart devices and how they can be used in DDoS attacks and things like this. And we see the signal of, botnets being built, especially when there is a vulnerability that is announced. And this can be not just in things like cameras, the thermostats, junk that you have, commodity quality, consumer quality equipment, networking equipment. Stuff gets vulnerable. People at home don't patch that stuff. You don't upgrade your firmware. So these things are out there being built all the time. I do want to tell a story because these guys have great stories and I have one. This happened to a jurisdiction in Washington State. And here's how it went down. This jurisdiction has an HVAC system and it, cools their data center. And they got an upgrade to the software for the console, right? It's just like any other kind of operational technology. It's got a management console and all these things. And brand new CD, brand new software from the manufacturer. They upgraded the software and immediately their HVAC system started sending out spam as if it was coming from yahoo.tw. And this was not the only place where this was going on. It was going on globally. And Yahoo in Taiwan got blacklisted for sending spam. Who do you think did that? This was a precursor of what happened to SolarWinds, where way back up in that supply chain, somehow they were compromised, and it could have been through an employee because that's a real easy way to do it. And they ended up sending out bad software that painted Taiwan as a spammer and got them knocked off the internet for a little while. So real stuff going on. So yes, there are more sophisticated techniques going on than just, finding a vulnerability in your camera that you have, exposed to the internet for unknown reasons. And it does include upstream compromise of the tools that we all need to use.
Yeah. And speaking of tools we all need to use, IoT devices keep coming up here. And, Mike Germain, one of the things we've been talking about is, the connected devices, of course. And in physical security, you need cameras, but those cameras are connected, right? How do you manage those? And I imagine the factory settings don't cut it.
No, that's right. We have a pretty thorough vetting of these cameras, and we have, as each camera comes in, we make sure that not just the settings but the software and stuff that runs through our cybersecurity group to make sure that we're practicing those pieces of hygiene and such. The big piece with that is on not just the security cameras that you mentioned, is that it's the bringing of cameras in general I got an engineer who wants to take a look at something. So they bring in a GoPro camera as they're doing modeling and other things so they can review later on. So it becomes, we've had to implement our own camera policies, no-goes on things you can bring and vetting lists and such, and making sure stuff is on the approved list, because as you have hundreds and thousands of employees that, they're looking to get stuff done. They are can-do people. They are trying to do the right thing, but this is not their world. So that we've had to provide education on these things and set really strict standardized policies to make sure that as you mentioned before, this is and I only use GoPro because it has a lot of those cameras have a Bluetooth functionality to them, so that if you're aware that Mike Germain is using one, and that you can access that later, you can ward drive them, do whatever you need to access that piece of equipment, and then exfiltrate any of the that's on the card if you were specifically targeting someone or other pieces, or if they had access closer to a building or manufacturing site and then had access to those type of cameras. So those things we're always looking at here with my team across the country on these things to make sure that the vetting policy on those cameras, because not just security cameras, which we keep into a closed loop and make sure that we don't use too many wireless cameras. We have to on occasion, but I try to keep things within a closed loop just to prevent that. But then you're looking at permissions and who can have access to those things, because hey, take a look at that camera. Well, why do you need to? It's all those things are vetted at director's level to make sure we don't have appropriate access, as well as trying to keep, to establish firm policy across the enterprise to make sure that we're using certified cameras so that you can exfiltrate data. And I say can't. You can always do something if you wanted, if somebody doesn't follow the procedure and stuff, but try to make it as difficult as possible, or at least, again, you have to still understand that people want to do the right things. What we are focusing in is on that 1% of 1% that is still going to cost you $1 million. So if you educate these behaviors and say, hey, why are you using that camera? That's not on the list, or you're not supposed to. That's a big deal. Or it's not just cameras that we can there, but a lot of businesses, including ours, I can't see mine. I apologize. Bad at the background, but I'm trying to hold up a cell phone. How many companies right now allow you to take pictures and video in your business on your cell phone and use that? Well, even if you have a split workday or some type of permission, a work side and a personal side on that cell phone, how do I know that it's not being used and you're actually turning it on your personal side? You can't control that. So, allowing the use of cell phones for this sort of permissions and stuff as cameras and workarounds, to take pictures of whiteboards and other things, we just don't allow. It's a safety matter, and most companies are ambiguous on those policies, and they avoid those sort of issues.
Yeah, and my couple questions are coming here in the chat, which is, appropriate controls on procurement up front are really important. What certifications do you look for in an IP camera or other IoT device to ensure it's secure? Nothing's secure, but
I don't think those certifications exist.
Yeah,
yet.
and then Greg is saying any good list of security cameras, anything you recommend. How would you answer those?
If DHS has a website and there is a certified list of cameras that are manufactured in countries, you should probably stay away from that are supplied. And that list is constantly updated. I'll go back and check to get the exact site so they post for those online that are interested. But there is DHS.
And what we'll do is. Yeah, and you're breaking up a little bit, Mike G. If you find that link, we'll put it in the email to everybody we send after the event too, to make sure everybody has it. Mike Hamilton, I know you advise a lot of companies, and especially healthcare organizations that have all sorts of IoT. How do you advise them on this topic? It's super difficult.
It's a different space too, right? Because if you disrupt the camera or use it for surveillance, nobody's going to die. On the other hand, if you do that to an infusion pump, that you could end up with a different outcome there. So, somebody, I forget who brought it up, but network segmentation is really a big deal if you were in the health sector. Really, you have to have no-go zones for, network traffic. And you have to monitor your network. If you ever have a medical device like an MRI console that's talking to the internet, something is wrong. Something has gone wrong. So, I would say those two things, it's basic hygiene, which includes good network segmentation, but then just monitoring the network and identifying those things on the network that should never pass a packet point past your telemetry point. We do a lot of this monitoring and catch stuff all the time that, and it's exactly as Brian and Michael talking about. You buy something, you don't know that it phones home. Okay. We find stuff that phones home all the time. So, medical devices in particular, because of this effort by, in my opinion, collusion between governments and these ransomware gangs to knock down the infrastructure of the United States, including hospital operations. These are very important issues. So, in today's world, we don't have that software bill of lading that federal government is talking about, and they're starting to develop, where you have the provenance of every component that goes into a product. There is no, underwriter lab seal of approval, but during the procurement process, 100%, yes, indeed, this is where you are able to ask the questions and put vendors through a ringer and make sure that you understand their processes, who works there, where they source their components, whether or not they respect the United States prohibition on 59 different companies that they should not be doing business with at all, so that we don't end up with another F-35 on the tarmac in a country we don't like.
And to support the discussion in a couple of arenas. So there's IT, the enterprise stuff. There's IoT, the small wearable things, and then there's OT, the operational technology.
And that's the scariest.
The pipelines. And so, quick version, just to establish bona fides, like since I've been doing the infrastructure protection stuff with Mike for many years at government, we also do the same thing. I've worked attacks on pipelines, mines, paper mills,
dams,
hospitals, anything. So a couple of areas. Telemedicine is now, Mike Hamilton, breaking the rule. The MRI machine is supposed to send images to locations where groups of doctors or reviewers are doing telemedicine. However, that doesn't preclude still good hygiene of extreme whitelisting or
access control.
The types and access control, multi-factor authentication, VPN tunneling, etc. Segmentation, for those of you that have that trouble of getting that to the executives, two ways to think about it. As prior Navy, I'll say it's watertight compartments on a ship. Don't be the Titanic. And also, or fire doors in your hotel if you have a more physical oriented board. The systems you're putting in, and as we look at cyber insurance, for the physical and cyber, the chief security officer, Mike Germain, being a great example of one, and the CISO, Mike Hamilton and myself being examples of those, need to bridge that gap without fighting. We need to talk about how you get to have the camera you want that puts the images where the enterprise needs them, that they can be controlled, preserved for litigation if needed, and kept confidential. One other note on that, the Tbilisi pipeline attack, Mike back in 2008. People walked physically along the pipeline with a laptop, hacked into the sensors for the overpressurization, disabled them, and then the pipeline blew up. A lot of people know that part of the story. What they don't know is simultaneously a different group hacked in and deleted 60 hours of the video of that section of the pipeline. These groups, if they're physical terrorists, they're going to try and cover their tracks by using cyber. If they don't want to be physically near something, they're going to try and do the whole thing through cyber. And 20 years ago, it wasn't really possible. Now with remote administration, remote maintenance, we're enabling the very pathway we now need to make sure is secure, both in the ports industry, in the hospital industries, for our water and sewage systems. And one small call out to a couple of the water people. We all still remember the Maroochy Shire 2001
Australia
attack in Australia. So a disgruntled employee still kept hacking back in and dumped 800,000 liters of sewage into a local park to prove he shouldn't have been fired. And when they arrested him, his car was filled with all the war dialing gear and laptops so he could be hacking into the system and cause basically a calamity of very unfortunate amounts of sewage and an impact on a population. So the water industry and others have been tracking this for over 20 years, but now it's becoming even more prevalent with the Colonial Pipeline attack as we look at the impacts on our ability to get gas or move trains or get to the hospital and be cared for.
I think it's really important to take the geopolitical situation into account as we're considering what's being threatened here. And we are not in a good spot with Russia and China right now. North Korea is a cutout for China. Iran is coming up and their tactics are getting more and more virulent. They're not about extorting you. They're just about, snuffing out your network. And man, there are things that are to Brian's point, laid wide open because we allow, remote access because everybody's remote. We have to do it, right? So we're backed into a corner on this. So we're talking about stuff like HVAC and data centers, right? HVAC is pretty primitive OT when it comes down to it. Okay. The places I really worry about that would cause great economic and social harm to the country when disrupted is obviously the health sector. It's already going on. But we see exactly what happens when ports get snarled. Ports are one of the biggest economic exposures we have in the United States. Something like $500 billion moves in and out of the West Coast ports every year. Okay, that's a big number. Dams is another one.
Well, and Mike, if I may, for those of you in the industry, and I know there's one or two of you on, the port of Cape Town, South Africa, had a ransomware attack, and the port was down for somewhere from 3 to 4 days for physically moving things. I can only imagine. So one issue about ransomware, once you're hit with it, it's like your house being flooded for weeks and mold growing all over everything. And then you have to scrub everything with a toothbrush. That port probably is still spending time decrypting things, even if they bought the key, even if they had backups. So that impact, there's a direct and recent, the Cape Town one, for those of you that want to see what a cyber incident can do to containers moving through a port.
Yeah. The last one on my list is, and you brought it up, Brian, it's IoT and smart cities, right? Cities, especially, when we're talking about middle of the country, rural areas, they just don't have practitioners that know how to secure stuff. And as a result, they're kind of laid wide open. So when we talk about what a city does, as they blow up their attack surface with all this junk that they're hanging on there, which, allows them to manage things, a lot of traffic, automated traffic management is great, right? But what is threatened here is water purification, waste treatment, right? That waste treatment is a big one. If my toilet won't flush for 3 days, we have a health emergency, not just from me.
Also, where do you think the clean water comes from for the people on the wastewater and the wastewater and water management group?
Exactly.
There needs to be a filter between those two halves of the process. So one of the things to be respectful to Jake as our host is, hey, I think we should kind of gear toward, I think we've got their attention. Now let's talk about what they can do leaving this room to address it. And I'll hand it to Mike Germain. As Mike, from frameworks and policy, where do you start to get a strategy together that then aligns all of these errant topics for a bank, for a hospital, for a water treatment facility, or the like? Or for people that make spaceships, just saying.
Yeah. But it's pretty broad, as you mentioned, but I mean, with working with cyber and the physical security heads, so a physical security officer, and find what your needs are. What are the crown is going to impact you the most, and wait backwards from there. But that with that, once you defined what you're set, where you want to vote things off, where you want to protect the most, you still need to come up with an education program, because half of this is, we've talked before, Mike and Brian and Jake, that discussed that once you set those frameworks, you begin to implement the policies, and you're doing all the things you're supposed to be doing, defining your goals, setting up a program in place, and then implementing it. It becomes an education piece. All the things you do is only as good as once is dependent upon the people that are working day to day. And if you don't follow the rules of basic hygiene, of the procedures you fall into place, that everything else just goes by the wayside. That you got to make sure your goals are clearly defined. You need to make sure that it's easy to implement, easy as it can be. Because if you make it too onerous, nobody's going to do it. So you have to, ease of use, clearly defined, and then educate and re-educate. How many times have we all seen that we have these great programs in place, and then all of a sudden it comes unglued because nobody's following it? You implement, you roll it out once, and you don't see it again. So that it's. Are they saying I'm breaking up? I hope you can hear me. I apologize.
No, we can hear you fine. The video's breaking up, but we can hear you just fine.
Nobody needs to see this face anyhow. I got a face made for radio. I appreciate everybody at least let me on here. So, but I think again, it's a clearly defined goal and procedure followed by implement a good implementation strategy for whatever you decide to put in place for that particular business and how you're looking at it. But then it's education. It's education and education, because again, you roll it out once and then you never hear about it again, it becomes forgotten.
And Xavier asked a question here that I think is pertinent to this discussion. And Brian, maybe you can take this one, which is, could physical and cybersecurity be brought under one umbrella or separated?
I would say, and that is a great question about the executive structure, but the answer is it needs to be aligned to your organization. In some organizations, a CISO reporting to a CIO is great. In other organizations, the CISO or even the CSO, the Chief Security Officer, sometimes oversees both physical and cyber. But what I would say for things like a bank, they're probably remarkably separate because of the speciality. But if you're an information organization, a purely born in the cloud group, then physical security might fit under the chief security officer, who's more CISO than physical. Gates guards bombs and dogs, Mike from back in the day. So I think also I've seen CISOs report to CTOs, general counsels, or sometimes direct to the CEO. But I think it really is the right separation of duties and the right reporting chain for effect. And I'll queue up, and Mike Hamilton, coming to you for a set spike kind of thing is,
Yep.
I think you start with a couple of things. Now, I joined the insurance industry for the following reason. Because car companies didn't invent airbags. Insurance companies did. Car companies didn't want to put in seatbelts, and still don't on school buses. And also steam engines back in the day didn't have a pressure relief valve. The insurance company the insurance industry will demand the right behaviors for you to get insurance coverage. In cyber, we're doing the same thing. So for those of you who don't have cyber insurance, now's your time to get it, because the door is closing quickly because of a lot of the trends. 2, even if you don't think you're going to get cyber insurance, the assessment process will tell you the smoke detectors, fire doors, and sprinkler systems that you're going to want to have, even more so if you're your own insurance company. We call that either self-insured or uninsured, or being a captive if you're more formal about it. That process put together with what your regulators for your banking and medical, or the regulators for wastewater and the ports, you map those standards together, and that gives you your North Star. Then you try and figure out the roles that play to it. Mike Hamilton and myself and others help with that journey. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah. So if I can summarize your point there, Brian, insurance companies are becoming the de facto regulator for everybody, right? You take credit cards, you're PCI. You handle health records, you're HIPAA. If you're a construction company, there's nobody standing on your neck. Well, now it's the insurance company. So welcome to the show. This is what everybody else has been dealing with for a long time.
In fact, my first case at Strauss Freeburg Aeon, when I was here in Seattle, and Mike Germain, I called you, was a 5-person construction company that had a business email compromise and got 150 grand stolen. And I referenced it to Secret Service, and we worked the case. But that was a material amount of that company's, that plucky little company. That was 1/3 of their yearly profit.
Yeah. And so since you brought up business email compromise, let me just make a prediction that I think is a pretty easy prediction to make. The infrastructure bill, money's about to rain out of the sky on local governments to hire lots of construction companies to do lots of infrastructure projects. And those construction companies are going to have their email systems penetrated because they pick crappy passwords. They're going to email to the city, say, here's my new bank account. Please change the routing number.
The Quad Cities in Kansas, Chicago somewhere, Quad Cities area had that very issue. The attackers attacked all the different construction companies, and were doing it both ways. They were sending the wrong bank information to the city, the wrong account information other ways. And those kind of things, it's the insurance companies are going to show you the behaviors that'll keep you out of trouble. Okay, for everybody on this call, everybody who deep fat fried a turkey in a vat of boiling oil in their own living room, please mark yourself in the chat room. Because you didn't, you probably still have homeowners insurance. So the same thing applies in cyber. These are the things not to do, or the good behaviors or smoke detectors to have. And that's, I think, the answer out of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that many of these discussions have, and why Mike and Jake and myself and Mike Germain came on this call. There's a calm enterprise risk management path out.
I want to answer the question about working together, right? The cyber and the physical side working together. Because as somebody who was, the information security officer for, 10,000 people and 30 something departments, all of which had different business models, it's really tough to be consistent across an organization that big. You need help. And frankly, I think the best place where we can work together is setting standards for procurement, right? I mean, the CSO is going to have the physical devices in there for surveillance, for physical access control, for things like that. And we need to work together to make sure that the stuff that comes in the door, we know where it came from. We know how it works. We know, you buy a camera, I'll put a sniffer on it. Okay. And that's the way we find this stuff out. So, I think the other thing is the CSO needs to set policy for things like, when you walk into this space, you will surrender your technology, right? We are all used to this. We're all used to going someplace where it's law enforcement intelligence. You walk in, you don't walk in with a phone. You put it in a locker, and there's lots of spaces, where you're handling intellectual property. To your point, you don't want all your AI IP ripped off. Surrender your electronics, even with watches and stuff. Now, if you have something sewn into a sweater, I don't know, Michael was talking about, the process of people exiting an organization. Look, man, pat down on the way out the door, and frankly, when somebody gives notice, you're done right now. We'll pay you the next 2 weeks, but we're walking you out right now.
The other thing in support of that, a HR process, 2, 1, gracefully shut off that person's accesses. Now, and like you say, Mike, whether you walk them out the door or allow them to do their 2 weeks, but you should do a 6 to 8 week backward looking look at the law. And before they leave the building, they re-sign the agreements about theft of intellectual property. And if you have any findings before they leave, before they get their final paycheck, you give them a small note and you go, from your lawyer or outside counsel, of course, we've noticed that you've uploaded to Gmail or emailed yourself 300 attachments. You will now return those materials and have a forensic company attest to their deletion on your personal devices. That is a lot of the work I end up doing. 2 other quick notes, and then I'll hand it back to the team is major cities and smart hospitals and all that. I work a lot of mega projects in that regard, and Mike works with me on those, Mike and Jake. Those are tons of overlapping issues between construction insurance, cyber issues, privacy and interaction, and physical safety. So let us know if that's an issue. We have a whole team of people that do that together with some of the engineering companies, Stantec and the like. And then mergers and acquisitions. You buy a company, you're buying all of its sins, all of its problems, and all of its insiders. We've seen adversaries place either employees or hacks in a company knowing it was going to be acquired to ride into the company that's acquiring it.
The real target.
A lot of mega breaches where that was the cause. The final other cause was that the password is still password of the AWS that was founded 6 years ago, and nobody changed it after 17 admins left. So those still, unfortunately, are true, but there's ways out of this. And I want to end with that part is a regimented look at a good North Star structure of your policies, your procedures, and your structure of your organization makes this a logical follow through. Not easy, but at least logical.
Right. I have one more point to make. In terms of working together, and I think this is something that is not explored enough. So when you badge into a door, makes a log. Okay. The cyber people generally don't have access to that log. We are aggregating all kinds of stuff that we are sniffing off the network. And when we can start to put together physical access and logical access and in aggregate start looking for anomalous behavior, you might be able to start identifying who is going to be a bad insider.
Did a case with that at one of the intel agencies. I've worked for all the 3-letter agencies and with all the 4-letter law enforcement ones, where we matched that the person wasn't in the building when the material was stolen. Somebody had their password. And here's one other thing about disaster recovery. If you have everybody has badges, even if the building burns down or is blown up or is taken over by a tsunami and you have to evacuate, you could use a remote laptop and a Wi-Fi for your rally point and have everybody badge in that they're alive and well and quickly get that information to your first responders. There's a double-sided benefit to that as well.
So usually I only leave a minute for final thoughts, but I have a feeling that I'm going to need more than that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a couple of quick things, and then we're going to go to final thoughts so you guys have a little extra time. So just quickly, here's what Critical Insight does. This is the new wheel. Since I run marketing, my team developed it, so I like it a lot. But we do managed detection response and strategic program development with all of these things in between. And obviously we have some overlap with what Brian does, and we love that and love working with him. Second thing to tell you is one of the things, although my PowerPoint is stuck, that we started offering this year because folks have been underwater with the pandemic is we usually charge for a 13-point assessment. We've been doing them for free. If folks are interested, let me know. It's just a 60-minute, get a sense of your current security posture. And lastly, 2 upcoming events we have. We have cybersecurity awareness training that Mike Hamilton and I do every other Friday. Bring anyone you want. We've had professors, we've had accountants, we've had bookkeepers. We saved one city $250,000 because their accountant came, got a business email, compromise email on the week of Christmas, which is coming up again, and did not, in fact, change the routing number. So make sure you sign up for that. Also, a cool one we're doing, vulnerabilities and cyber attacks in Microsoft Azure. If you use Azure, you got to see what our head of pen testing came up with there. And lastly, this is how to contact us if you want to contact us. And I'm going to put the survey in the chat. And remember that in the survey, we do have a question about what your favorite story or parable was. Is it the hot dog story or something else? So fill out the survey. We want to hear it. All right, final thoughts. Let's start with Mike Germain.
I appreciate it. The final thoughts here is that there's a definite meld between cyber and physical security. Your CISO and your chief physical security officer need to be in alignment with their goals to accurately provide the necessary security, because if you're not in alignment over these issues and see things different ways, then you're never going to achieve your goals. Everybody from top down, legal, HR, procurement. Mike Hamilton, spot on with that. It was a great example. If procurement is not in alignment with you, then again, your security stuff doesn't work. So everybody running all the various business units need to be in alignment with these different practices. Once they're not, if anybody is a shortcut, it doesn't see it. So it starts at the head of business and then it's its way down. And that it's key to ensuring the stuff is not walking the door on you. It's the alignment issue on it. Long way of saying it, but you have to have a focused goal. Everybody needs to be on the same page with it. Otherwise, you're just spinning your wheel.
Brian, final thoughts.
Gotcha. Thanks, everyone. Very much appreciate the time today and the chance to talk to the teams. And very much, reach out on LinkedIn and reach out through Mike and the team. Also, besides the upcoming events, we'll be doing a special one for the healthcare industry. Jake and I were just talking to a healthcare CISO who's going to come on a panel like this with us. We're all in this together, and we team with a lot of these companies for the pen testing and advisory and the cyber smoke jumping. Let us know how we can help you get to the next phase, and appreciate your time today. You didn't have a lot of it to attend this call.
Are you kidding? We all have a ton of time. No, just kidding. All right, Mike Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks to everybody for attending. And this is a topic, it's evolving, but we talk more and more and more about this. And I think what's driving the conversation a lot is what we've seen happen in supply chain. And now everybody is worried about the physical security of devices as they are being assembled and delivered to you. My advice is the same as it always is for everything. Monitor everything. And if you can aggregate your physical access logs as well and start to tease out things like, well, this person is now entering through a separate door at a different time of day and doing it more frequently, and that looks aberrational. So maybe I'll look at some network traffic to see what's going on here, see if there's anything weird, right? If possible, do that and develop playbooks. right? Have a plan when something goes down where you know what to do.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Brian. Thank you, Mike Germain. Thank you, Mike Hamilton, for joining us. We really appreciate it. And if we don't see you before then, happy holidays to everybody. And we'll see you at the next event. Thanks,
Yep.
all.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks all.